Hey, Miguel Iturrate back here on the CRP, and we are going to hit you with one of our UFC wage rages. We have the UFC in Chicago this weekend for the UFC 238 card. It's a pay-per-view. The undercard fights are going to be on ESPN and ESPN Plus the app, so check your local listings for all three different start times. I'm joined by my ace MMA analyst, Devin Miller, to look at the odds and to make calls for most of these fights. As a matter of fact, I think we're going to answer the call here for about 9 of the fights. Is that right, Dev?
That's correct, Miguel. And we're going to start off with Calvin Kattar taking on Ricardo Lamas in the featherweight division. What are the odds for that fight, Miguel?
Right now, I've got Kattar at minus 170, Lamas at plus 150, a slight underdog. They will kick off the ESPN portion of the card.
Yeah, this is a good. I wanted to cover all the way down here because there's a lot of fights on this card that are significant to the top 15 rankings right now. You got coming in here, you got Ricardo Lamas ranked as the number 10 ranked featherweight. You got Kattar as the number 15 ranked featherweight. Ricardo Lamas, a former title challenger to Jose Aldo back in 2014. Been under Zuffa since 2009 in the WEC days, and has been really a top 10 staple in this division for many years. Kattar is a newcomer coming up, has showed a lot of promising talent. His only loss inside the octagon so far was a decision loss to Hinata Moicano, who's currently ranked as the number 5 contender in here. He's actually got a knockout over Shane Burgos, who just beat Cub Swanson recently. I think with this fight, it's experience versus youth, but I think the youth is going to prevail here. I think that there's a lot of upside with Calvin Kattar, and I think that he'll get it done with an aging Ricardo Lamas in this fight. But this is a potential dog pick for somebody because Lamas does have the experience. He's always been a gritty, tough competitor. So, but I'm going to go with my official pick being Calvin Kattar by unanimous decision.
And as I said, that'll open up the ESPN portion of the broadcast. Moving on right down the line, we've got strawweight action among the ladies. We've got Karolina Kowalkiewicz, and she's favored at minus 140, facing veteran Alexa Grasso. Grasso plus 120.
Yeah, this is another fight that is got some implications for the top 15. You got Grasso, a 25-year-old with a 500 record in the UFC right now. Just came off a loss to Tatiana Suarez, who many believe is going to be the future champion of this division. She's ranked number 13 against the number 10 ranked Kowalkiewicz. Again, a lot like the last fight, a former title challenger. She fought Joanna Jędrzejczyk back in her reign to a 5-round decision. She's been a staple in the top 10 for this division for a while. She's 2-4 in her last 6 fights, but those 4 losses are against Michelle Waterson and Claudia Gadelha and Jessica Andrade. She got knocked out by Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So she's losing to the best of the best. But once again, with the last fight, I see this as youth versus experience. In this fight as well, I see youth prevailing. I think Alexa Grasso is a tough young competitor, really good wrestling. I think she's just going to be a little bit hungrier and a little bit more driven in this fight. And I think that she'll win a unanimous decision over a uninspired Kowalkiewicz, who I just haven't really seen. I've seen her drive to want to compete kind of being dwindled away by taking some losses. So I think Grasso is going to be the hungrier fighter and going to pull off a win here.
And interesting about Alexa Grasso, she comes from a family of fighters. Her brother or uncle, I believe, participated in a reality fighting show that I was involved with in around the 2009 time period. So the Grasso family out of Mexico showing some pedigree, and obviously the brother didn't make it to the UFC, but Alexa did. A lot riding on that. You know, the UFC could always use a top-notch Mexican star, and she's young and has some charisma, so we'll see how that one goes. Definitely an interesting fight there. It's not the first it is the first of the women's fights, rather, but not the only women's fight on the ESPN card. But first, we've got bantamweight men as Pedro Munhoz and Aljamain Sterling square off. This was a close fight. Aljamain Sterling minus 135 favorite. Munhoz plus 115 right now.
Yeah, this is the first of three very, very significant and big bantamweight fights on this card. Both these guys are top 5 ranked bantamweights in a wide open division since former bantamweight champion T.J. Dillashaw was stripped of the belt earlier this year due to a performance enhancing drug violation. Sterling coming in ranked number 3, Munhoz coming in ranked number 4. Sterling is 4-1 in his last 5 fights. His lone loss being a devastating knockout at the hands of Magic Marlon Moraes, who's fighting for the title later on, and he's coming off a win over another top 10 bantamweight, Jimmie Rivera. And Munhoz, on the other hand, is 7-1 in his last 8, and he's coming off biggest win of his career, the knockout over Cody Garbrandt. And when I look at this fight, both these guys are very, very good grapplers. Pedro Munhoz is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Aljamain Sterling, not very threatening on the feet with any sort of strikes, but he's elusive. He's a cerebral, smart fighter, and he's got really good wrestling, really good grappling, gets people in good positions. I don't think that style is going to work, though, against Munhoz. One thing I can say about Sterling, that he won't make the mistake Cody Garbrandt made of trying to get in a firefight with Munhoz. But Munhoz did show in that fight that he does have firepower. And I think that he's also got good enough grappling, maybe even superior grappling, definitely not the superior wrestling, but maybe superior grappling to avoid getting dominated in grappling positions. And I think that that's going to be the difference here. I do think that Munhoz is going to have to strike in this fight, and that Sterling's going to have to strike in this fight. I think Munhoz will be the guy with the more firepower. I've got the underdog winning this fight. I've got Munhoz taking home the win.
And Munoz coming in at plus 115 here. The last card on the ESPN portion, you mentioned Tatiana Suarez. You get Tatiana Suarez. She's a big minus 900 favorite, and she takes on Nina Ansaroff. As you said, Suarez having a little bit of a hype and a bandwagon building up behind her, and she's actually the CRP's prospect of the week this week. Suarez Ansaroff, how you see this one?
Well, I think it is kind of unheard of to have 2 top 5 competitors in the UFC and have this lopsided of odds, at least in the UFC. But that's just how good Tatiana Suarez is. Calling her the Khabib of women is not an understatement. So far, I mean, her last fight really proved a lot to a lot of people against Carla Esparza, who's also a very strong wrestler herself, and she had no answers. She could not stop anything Tatiana did. She passed her guard with ease. She, I think, would be a threat to a lot of flyweights in the division up, including potentially even a super fight with champion Valentina Shevchenko. I think she continues to win with ease this weekend. Nina Ansaroff is on a good run, four wins in a row, including a win over Claudia Gadelha in her last fight, which is saying something. But Tatiana is just a different animal, and I think we're going to see Tatiana take on Jessica Andrade later this year. I think this is going to be another just star performance by Tatiana, and I think that she's deserving of the odds. I think she's deserving of the hype, and she's deserving of the CRP prospect of the week. Tatiana Suarez, either by unanimous decision or rear naked choke.
You'd be laying out minus 900 for that. On to the pay-per-view portion of the card. We're in Chicago for UFC 238. And the pay-per-view is going to open with heavyweights, Blagoy Ivanov, Tai Tuivasa, Tuivasa favorite at minus 145, Ivanov plus 125. If I'm not mistaken, Ivanov coming off a win against Ben Rothwell, where, a lot of people feel Rothwell pulled that out here. He's walking as an underdog on short notice against Tuivasa.
Yeah, I agree with you, Miguel. I remember we recapped that fight, and neither one of us thought that Rothwell lost that fight, and that was the only fight that we actually lost on our wage rage that night. And I remember I felt like I kind of had a perfect night because I thought it was a pretty clear win for Rothwell. Ivanov is a tough guy, though. I mean, he's able to stand in there with big, heavy strikers like Rothwell and Junior Dos Santos and go the distance with him. He went 5 rounds with Junior Dos Santos. He went 3 rounds with Rothwell. But he's supposed to be a very good wrestler, which I'm not denying that he probably is. I think he's a Greco-Roman competitor, but he doesn't transition very well to it, and he tends to stand in the pocket and try to strike. I don't think that that's going to be a good strategy with Tuivasa, but I'm also not sure that Tuivasa is going to be able to have anything different to offer here that Dos Santos and Rothwell didn't. So I'm not sure he's going to get him out of there. Tuivasa is a 26-year-old heavyweight with a lot of promise. Good personality. He's good on radio. He's exactly what the UFC needs, an Australian fighter to move forward. I think that he could be a potential star in this division. Went 3-0, was undefeated, ran into Junior Dos Santos, which there's no shame in that. Heavyweights lose more than any other MMA fighters on the roster. They have their ups and downs, and they can still come back from it. He took a hard second-round stoppage loss to Dos Santos in his last fight. I think that'll only make him better. He looks leaner, looks like he's in better shape. Probably made him buckle down and focus more. I think he'll come out sharp in this fight and pull off the win. So I got Tuivasa pulling off probably a decision win over a heavy-headed Ivanov.
And we mentioned the UFC 238 puts the focus firmly on the bantamweight division. Talk about hot stuff. Petr Yan taking on Jimmie Rivera, a couple of prospects. Yan, really few blemishes on his record. He's a minus 355 favorite. Jimmie Rivera has already seen how up and down your career can go in the UFC. He's at plus 295 here, looking for a win.
Yeah, and when I look at this fight, this is the second of the three big bantamweight fights. That's going to show us a lot more about where this division is going. When I look at why they would have put this on the main card rather than putting the Sterling Munhoz fight, which both those guys are actually ranked higher than both these guys in this fight, it begs the question, why did they choose to put Petr Yan versus Jimmie Rivera on the main card and stick Munhoz and Sterling in the prelims? Well, there's I have one theory that it's because the ESPN prelims are going to be on the network. They wanted to see the top 5 competitors go at it. I don't think that's what it is, though. I think that it's 100% about Petr Yan. I think that they know this kid's really good, and they're wanting to showcase him even more. And the odds are reflecting that. I think those odds are a little too skewed, considering that Jimmie Rivera is even a further step up in competition than John Dodson was. But I still, Jimmie Rivera was somebody that I thought was on the way to maybe even securing this bantamweight title, fighting Dillashaw a couple years ago. I mean, I thought he was on his way to that. But then he met up with Marlon Moraes and took a 20-some second knockout, head kick knockout in a main event up in, I think it was Utica, New York. He hasn't been the same since then. He seemed a little gun shy. I think he did have a win over John Dodson, but then he loses to Aljamain Sterling. And that happens to some fighters. They get knocked out. They don't ever come back the same. I think that there's something that happened to Rivera in that fight, and I think that this was bad management. It was management malpractice to get him signed up with Petr Yan for a fight after losing to Sterling. I think Petr Yan is going to drown Rivera. He is such a pressure-oriented fighter, heavy-headed Russian, been training in Thailand. Mean as a hornet when he fights. So I and just does not give you any breathing room. Petr Yan is my dark horse in this division, and I think that he goes in there and drowns Rivera, and I like Rivera as a fighter, but Petr Yan, safe pick.
That's our second heavy-headed fighter. What happens when a heavy-handed fighter faces a heavy-headed fighter? We'll have to discuss that one day on a podcast there, Devin. But as we move on here, the lightweight fight that is coming up here is certainly one that could be a main event anywhere in the country, could even main event a pay-per-view, but no title on the line. Definitely the number one contenders at lightweight at play here. Tony Ferguson, a minus 135 favorite over the Cowboy Don Cerrone. Cerrone plus 115. You might as well call it a pick-em fight.
It is a pick-em fight, and this is one I went back and forth on. I would have picked Tony Ferguson to win this fight 2 years ago. Unquestionably, this would have been a quick turnaround. I'd have said Tony Ferguson, decision or finish before the 3 rounds is up, no question. But since then, Tony Ferguson's had a lot of time off. He tore his ACL. He's been in a few more wars, especially the one with Anthony Pettis, which Anthony Pettis was dropped Tony Ferguson in. And if there's been one big criticism of Tony Ferguson in his career, it's that he does get hit. And he does tend to sometimes look kind of sloppy because he takes a lot of risks. But it's his pressure, his ability to withstand the shots and withstand any sort of grappling attack, create scrambles, stay in your face and break you, that tends to wear people out and finish the fight. Um, he's only going to have 3 rounds to work with Cerrone, and I think Cerrone's a bigger fighter, and I don't think that he's going to be much of a threat in the grappling department. I think this is going to mainly be Cerrone being the sharper, crisper, more technical striker with heavier strikes, while Ferguson's looking to break him with pressure. I went back and forth on this. I thought for sure I'd end up picking Ferguson as a runaway. I've changed my mind last minute due to the kind of run that Cerrone's on. Cerrone has been looking so sharp lately. He looked so good against Al Iaquinta, and I think people have been a little nervous about Cerrone taking this fight so fast of a turnaround after a 5-round fight with Al Iaquinta. This will be his 3rd fight already this year. But people forget this is Donald Cerrone. There's a reason why he has more fights and more wins in the UFC than any other person, and more fights under Zuffa and more wins under Zuffa than any other fighter. It's because he loves to do this. He wants to fight every other month. He's striking while the iron's hot right now, if you will. My prediction is that Donald Cerrone wins this fight. It's going to be a big upset.
Very, very interesting. And then on to the title fights in the flyweight division. We've got champ Valentina Shevchenko. She's coming off her first title defense, and she's facing Jessica Eye Shevchenko, a prohibitive minus 1,400 favorite. Eye providing the competition a plus 925 dog.
Yeah, this is the odds I think are valid for this. Jessica Eye, tough girl, but Jessica Eye I think might be the first title contender in the history of the UFC that has a losing record. She's actually 4-5 overall in the UFC. In her UFC record, this is a division that has not developed yet. It's a newly formed division that just came about just a little over a year ago. There's been one title fight in it. It was between Valentina Shevchenko, a former bantamweight, taking on a former strawweight in Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So one goes down, one goes up. Valentina wrecks her for 5 rounds, and now she's fighting Jessica Eye, a woman who, like I said, has a losing record inside the UFC. I think that this is still a division that's just so lopsided with the champion and everybody else until some of these newer, younger talent develop and come up the ranks a little bit in the future. I'll just keep this short. Valentina Shevchenko gets Jessica Eye out of there before the championship rounds.
And the main event of the evening is now we're back at the near Pick'em land as we've got Marlon Moraes taking on Henry Cejudo, the vacant 135-pound title formerly in the possession of TJ Dillashaw, is up for grabs here. Cejudo plus 100, Moraes minus 120, but Moraes on a startling run since he joined the UFC roster.
Yeah, former World Series of Fighting champion. I think he's like 17-1 in his last 18 fights or something. In his past 3 fights, he's finished 3 of the top 10 guys in this division in the first round. He submits Rafael Assunção in a rematch in the first round, and he just completely starched Jimmie Rivera and Aljamain Sterling in less than a minute, both with head kicks. Literally made Sterling have to leave on a stretcher. It was brutal. And on top of that, I mean, he's training over there in Jersey with Mark Henry and Frankie Edgar and them. So he's going to be prepared to deal with some wrestling. He's a very complete fighter. He looks like an action figure, and he's also mean. He's just a mean, driven competitor that you know is going to show up on weight, and you know that's going to be ready to fight. You don't got to worry about where Marlon Moraes is in his head. Cejudo, though, is a lot of the same thing. He's a born competitor, doesn't know how to lose. He's a born winner, Olympic gold medalist, as we all are. He reminds us every day about. He's the flyweight champion. He's got a knockout win over TJ Dillashaw. He's got a unanimous decision win on the books against Demetrius Johnson, which was a controversial and very close fight, but nevertheless, he managed to do that, which is saying something. You throw somebody in a cage with Demetrius Johnson, and at the end of the day, you walk away with the gold when you take his belt from him. Even if it's controversial, that's saying a lot because he was just wrecking everybody. He's going to be moving up. I think he's going to be very comfortable at this weight class. I think he's the better wrestler, clearly. But I think the difference is going to come down in this fight is going to be the firepower. Once again, I just think Marlon Moraes is going to have a little bit more firepower than Cejudo. And I don't know if he's going to get Cejudo out of there, but I think that he wins the fight. And I'm definitely leaning toward Moraes. I think Moraes is going to be a tough guy to take the belt from once he wins it from any of these new competitors, whether it's Petr Yan or Pedro Munhoz or Corey Sandhagen or Aljamain Sterling, or I think any of them are going to have a hard out against Marlon Moraes at this point. So I got Marlon Moraes becoming the new Bantamweight champion.
It's hard to argue with what he's shown, and Cejudo at plus 100. A lot of people are picking him. Basically, as you stated, with his pedigree, a lot of people feel he's got champ, or he'll be the next champ kind of person here as he grabs the Bantamweight title. That's what's on the line at UFC 232. That's what's on the line at UFC 238. And I'm Miguel Iturrate, joined by our ace MMA analyst, Devin Miller, to make picks for the ESPN portion of the card and the pay-per-view card this weekend. The fights are roughly 24 hours away at this point. We'll see you after the fights.